Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you. Organifi is a line of organic superfood blends that offer plant-based nutrition made with high-quality ingredients. Each Organifi blend is science-backed to craft the most effective doses with ingredients that are organic and free of fillers and contain less than 3 grams of sugar per serving, like Organifi green juice with essential superfoods and a clinical dose of ashwagandha. It helps reduce stress and support healthy cortisol levels. Or Organifi red juice, a superfood punch that increases energy without caffeine and only 2 grams of sugar. Each Organifi blend is easy to use simply by mixing it with water or your favorite beverage while on the go, and they don't compromise quality for taste. Organifi takes pride in offering the best-tasting superfood products on the market at a price that works out to less than $3 a day. You can experience Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Go to Organifi.com/genius and use the code GENIUS for 20% off your order. That's Organifi.com/genius. Use code GENIUS to get 20% off any item. Remember, www.Organifi.com/genius.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Olly Dowlen. We're going to talk about the Political Potential of Sortition. It's a study that he oversaw of the random selection of citizens for public office, part of the Sortition and Public Policy. So, Oliver, thanks for coming. How you doing?
Hello. Yes, great to be here. Great to be asked. Want to know more about this wonderful project? Well,
please tell me about the current project.
Current work that I'm doing. Well, at the moment, I've been looking at some ideas about extension of democracy and why the people who were advocating democracy were unable to look at the idea of extending democracy in the 19th century. That's the work I'm doing at the moment. Particularly the idea of how much people actually knew about the random selection of citizens for public office and when did they know them. They're important people like, say, Marx and Engels that seem not to have known about it. And lots of people who've advocated democracy knew a little bit about what had happened in Athens, but not enough to really know and think, how could this apply to the present day? So that's what I'm looking at the moment. which is quite interesting.
What do you mean the extension of democracy? What does that mean?
What I mean is that we have a model of democracy which involves regular elections, parliaments and other bodies. The extension of democracy is the idea that citizens should be involved in the democratic process on an ongoing basis between elections, and to safeguard some of the vital organs that are needed and institutions that are needed to keep democracy going and stop it becoming a tyranny or stop it becoming abused or corrupted. So that's
in what ways do you see democracy being abused or corrupted? Like, what are some examples?
Well, examples are where there's some form of operation that's happened, something that hasn't actually had the approval of the people, and yet something that would affect the people a lot. Yeah. So
that seems to happen constantly. Like here in the UK, wherever we elect officials, and then they may do things. They do lots of things without expressly asking their base.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I have this.
Process seems somewhat, reactionary at best.
Oh yeah. I would not. I'm not one of these people that advocate the idea that elections should be done away with and should be replaced with random selection. I have something that I did a few years back now, funded by an Australian organisation, which was about citizens' parliamentary groups. And the idea of that was there should, for each sitting MP or congressperson or whoever who had been elected, there are around about 20 members of the public from their constituency that are selected randomly, and they have various tasks to do. It's like to make sure that the MP adheres to the code of conduct, that they're not corrupted or taking little business deals on the side for supporting various government action. There's that sort of thing, and also to help the links, create stronger links between the wider constituency and that MP, and also to demand action on any issue that they think is a threat to the integrity of the political process. So that's that idea. And to do that thing, to demand action, they could have a recall, they could have another election, but in order to instigate that, they would have to be supported by two or more other groups, parliamentarians, so it couldn't become a little sort of slugging match between people with partisan interests.
There's a trade-off there. Like, if it takes a lot, it seems like, to recall someone. It takes a massive amount of money and effort and time.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they can get away with all kinds of bad behavior. But if you make it too easy, then that could be used as a weapon, so nothing can get done. So what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, but I think the gist of it, like anything, any new idea has to be quite rigorously designed, so to speak, so that the powers are in control, so that they have particular powers. I mean, we've had juries for years, so we know about this, and there were times when the juries actually took a very important role in creating the democracy that we have now. Raise one issue is the seditious libel controversy, and that took place in the 18th century in Britain and the American colonies as they were then. And if somebody published something critical of the government, they could be prosecuted by that under seditious libel. And what used to happen is that if the juries thought that the criticism was justified, they would acquit the person. And this happened over a period of about 40, 50 years. Cases would come up and juries would acquit. Then finally the law changed that allowed the juries to do this, although, of course, they were doing it without being necessarily disallowed, so to speak. Anyway, what this did was to guarantee freedom of speech, from which the movement for democracy in the 19th century thrived. If they hadn't have had that, people would have been prosecuted for seditious libel, you see. So you have a jury system there, which is a randomly selected system, but the juries actually have quite a controlled function, and they sort of, in this sort of controversy, they just extended their boundaries bit by bit. You can see how that happened, yeah?
Well, that answers one potential way to use it, right? And I guess, again, the other side is political opponents. Again, if it's too easy, then it can be used to, I guess, make someone impotent, where they couldn't do anything, they couldn't get anything done.
I think, I've got in the study that I did for citizens' parliamentary groups, there were very clear boundaries of I mean, they would have kind of monthly meetings with the MP and ask questions and things like that. And but they would publish accounts of this, but there were certain things they could criticise on and certain things that they couldn't. So it was you know, what I'm saying is, like in the juries, where the juries have a specific role, and they're controlled in what they can do and what they can't, and how they do it. What they can't tell them to do is how to make up their minds on a particular case. You know, they have to do that themselves. In the same way with any group, with any use of random selection at any point, then you have to control it and make it so it doesn't affect the total government, but helps the people get more in contact with what's happening on their behalf and make sure that the system is working well. Yeah, does that make sense? I'm pretty sure it does.
It makes sense. Just as a regular person, like I'm trying to live my life. I don't have time to know every issue that's going on in in our Congress and Senate and all that. And I have even less time to do anything about the issues that I don't like that are being voted on or how they're being voted on.
Yeah, sure.
So how are we supposed to have like a true democracy then? It just seems to be very difficult with impossible trade-offs.
I think we've got to look at it in sort of different ways. I mean, one is, if you think about sort of freedom, well, you've got freedom from government, but you've also, in order to maintain those freedoms, you have to have freedom to participate. And it's, you know, I mean, the Athenians had huge numbers of people randomly selected that were part of their, not only of the boule, which is the main council, but they also were magistrates, and they also had the people's courts. So of the citizens, of those who were citizens, male and not female, all sorts of restrictions like that, no slaves and so on. But within that citizen body, there was an immense amount of participation. And I think, from what I understand of it, they actually knew that by participating, they were defending that system from corruption and from aristocratic takeover. Yeah. So it's part of how they understood democracy was much wider, and in terms of participation and in terms of the defense of that democracy than what we have nowadays.
You mentioned earlier on that random selection is not something that you think would be good, that elections are important. Is there like a hybrid, you know, maybe for lower positions, random selection's okay, or maybe advisory bodies?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the key to it here is the idea of the citizen witness. And that sort of idea that it opens up areas of political discussion to the witness. I mean, the old idea was, I think there's one scheme put forward by Machiavelli, a similar one, where you have tribunes that are at quite a high level. And if they hear or something that they think needs greater approval, they bounce it down to a broader assembly, you see, so without, you know, sort of putting their foot on everything that they feel. If they feel something is wrong and is creeping through without sufficient scrutiny from the system, then they can refer it. You know, so it's that sort of game between limited responsibility but widespread limited responsibility, and the more how we understand it with people who are professional politicians. That's how I can see the system developing, or possibly developing. You know, I think we have problems at the moment with people with dropping polling rates and so forth. So I think, you know, the idea of people actually feeling that citizens themselves feeling that they actually own the system to some greater extent, as they do in common law with where you have juries. They feel that the system belongs to the people.
But again, what would this look like in practice? What do you imagine it would look like?
Well, I think useful to make a distinction between those areas of the polity that are the state and those that are government. And I think one of the key things about random selection is its impartiality, if you like. That's why it was actually used. So I think in areas of the state, wherever you have anything that's controlled or run by the state, having groups of citizens involved somewhere in our National Health Service, for instance, I think that would be a key place, and also in nationalised industries, so that nationalised industries are not just little firms that are only accountable through the civil service, but they're actually citizens involved in saying what it's like to be the recipients, how well the trains are running, and all that. There's a whole stack of things, and you can take it even further. The Athenians actually had a head of state who was randomly selected for one day at a time. That they had a situation where they had a council of 500, and there was a group of those who were in charge as a sort of special executive. And then one member of this special executive, which was like per 10th of a year, one member would be head of state for one day, and they would hold the key to the treasury, and they would receive all the foreign visitors. Yeah.
Again, what would this look like? So randomly selected citizens or specific ones would, the elected official would be required to counsel with them on certain issues or to meet with them at a certain frequency, or how do you make sure that there actually is citizen participation?
Yeah, I think in all these things there needs to be very careful planning, very careful pilot schemes, and so forth in our current situation. But what it does is it just moves everything on a bit, if you like, in terms of citizen engagement, citizen responsibility. You have to think quite carefully, so that, as you say quite rightly, that you don't want the situation where it actually impedes the form of government. You want it so that it strengthens the government. There's the citizens' parliamentary groups in a way help the idea of representation. It's a two-way process there. The MP can have valuable discussions with the members themselves of the group to find out what their opinions are all the time, rather than always going through the party line. Now, if you think about it, if you have people doing this, and this is like an entry level, something that's fairly not carrying too much power, but is important nonetheless, then you've got a huge number of people that have held this office, and then could be form the pools for other forms of other institutions. There's one book I was reviewing recently about science, about the dangers of science being unaccountable, and that when scientific projects get going, they can get a momentum of their own and then become almost unstoppable without the fears of people about the various harms that these could do. And the person who wrote this book suggested that there should be something like a science court that's quite early on in the funding stages to discuss all these things and bring them out into the open, and that randomly selected citizens might be useful in that. So you can see all sorts of areas like this, that if people have had some experience at an entry level, there would be other areas where citizens' views would be very, very important.
Organifi is a line of organic superfood blends that offer plant-based nutrition made with high-quality ingredients. Each Organifi blend is science-backed to craft the most effective doses with ingredients that are organic and free of fillers and contain less than 3 grams of sugar per serving, like Organifi green juice with essential superfoods and a clinical dose of ashwagandha. It helps reduce stress and support healthy cortisol levels. Or Organifi red juice, a superfood punch that increases energy without caffeine and only 2 grams of sugar. Each Organifi blend is easy to use simply by mixing it with water or your favorite beverage while on the go, and they don't compromise quality for taste. Organifi takes pride in offering the best-tasting superfood products on the market at a price that works out to less than $3 a day. You can experience Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Go to Organifi.com/genius and use the code GENIUS for 20% off your order. That's Organifi.com/genius. Use code GENIUS to get 20% off any item. Remember, www.Organifi.com/genius.
Okay, so what would a science court look like, for instance, on an issue?
Well, the science court, this is someone called Zeynep Pamuk, who's just written a book about science and democracy. So, I would have perhaps a different way of designing it, but it would be a science court. So what it would be is that when a new proposal seemed to be coming up, that citizens had the right to petition and to say they wanted the science court to be held on such and such an issue. Say, the popular one at the moment, of course, is question of the speed that vaccines were introduced, with very little discussion on the side effects, for instance. So that's this one. There are other important issues about what science is doing in terms of ecological problems that might arise, or they might be there to, we can probably, it's not down to me to name them, but the citizens might be concerned about the long-term effects, just the harm that they feel might possibly be done, and ask for the science court to be convened. So they initiate, that's important, and there would be experts. They could nominate experts themselves. There could be other experts nominated by other parties. There would be the similar thing that we have in a court, where you have a very simple question put forward, or a number of very simple questions, and there would be those who advocated it and those who opposed it, and there would then be a vote by the citizens in the grouping there. That's the sort of thing that Zeynep had in her advocacy of this sort of thing. Yeah.
Has this been tried, or is there a
No.
is there a lab where even on a city level or some kind of level where this is being tried?
No, this is a new idea. It's not been tried in our. I mean, you can see that has been the case in ancient Athens. There were jurors up to 2,000 jurors. 2001, in fact, was the figure. You always had the one, so that in case they, and that would happen with those. If somebody felt that or thought that there were elected politicians as well, but if one of the office holders was guilty of corruption, they could set up a court. Yeah, they could defame. They could call the court. Yeah, and then what would happen is people would talk on for and against, and then the jurors who were all randomly selected would then vote in a secret ballot, yes or no to these actions. So it's been done before, but only in the small city states and a long time ago. But I'm sure that you could look at examples of that and see how that could be adapted in a modern context. To give people a lot of
are there any really good historical examples with details of how it worked and what the outcomes were?
Yes. The Athenian one, it's definitely there. There's the famous one. I can't remember the name of the battle, but there was a famous sea battle in which the captains of the fleet sailed past the wrecked boats without stopping to pick up those who were struggling in the water. And that was brought in front of the courts in Athens. It's very, and they then found the captains who'd done this sailing past as guilty of not considering their fellow sailors. You see, so there's lots of examples in Athens particularly where this was much more widespread. Now, of course, it was used in lots of other contexts as well, and in lots of different ways.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, people always try to game the system, whatever the system may be.
Yeah.
So are there have you or other people thought through, like, how could this system be gamed and how could it be tweaked so that there's less likelihood of it? I know it's not possible to 100%, but, what elements do you think are critical to making sure that this is not a BS process? It actually happens and, it's not contorted or twisted to someone's will.
Well, I go back to the work that I was doing, and I mean, you're looking at. I mean, it was. I should say it's not really discussed. It's only in the last kind of 10, 15 years that there have been real proper discussion of it. We're not in a position at the moment where we have a lot of modern examples. If you would compare this to Athens, or we would compare it to the republics in the Renaissance period and then the late Middle Ages, and particularly in Italy, they were doing it all the time. And so when they could watch what happens with one case, they could see how it worked and how it didn't and adjust it for the next case. Now, we're not in that position quite at the moment. There is an interesting example that was used in Mexico recently. I think it's the Morena Party, Marina Party, and they actually, in their selection of candidates, used random selection for a certain proportion, which actually prevented the corruption that had, or inhibited the corruption that had gone into people trying to find their way onto the candidates lists. And that was very successful. Got a lot of new people into the parliament as well. So there are people who are kind of using it and getting success from it, but it's not as widespread, I'm saying, as it was in certain periods. And I think it grew up in these periods because of the sort of dangers they were facing. Because really, to do something randomly, it's a bit of a last resource. You've got to have a real serious and really good reason for using random selection instead of just using conscious discrimination. Yeah.
Where would you like to see this implemented as a good modern test? Where could it be where you think it would have a good chance of, not only being successful, but being an example for larger things to incorporate and use it?
Well, I can only talk about the ones that I'm thinking of at the moment. But I keep coming across various things where people are saying, "Oh, this is a leak in the public interest," for instance. Yeah. Now, I think that if anybody was claiming there was public interest in leaking a document or whatever, then it should be the public that decides that, and rather than having the whole public having a referendum on a single small issue like that random selection is a good way of working that, because what it is here is that, and I was looking at it myself when I first started doing the research project on it, was how do you actually understand random selection? And I think the way that I did it was to draw two parallel lines, and if we were doing it visually, I would draw this now for you, vertically top to bottom, and that does a thing called the blind break. And on the one side, on the left-hand side of that, you draw up all the options, and on the other side, you draw the chosen option. Now, the blind break is a key feature of the lottery. If you don't have a blind break, it's not a proper lottery, or if that's compromised in any way. And I always say that if you're designing forms of randomly selected citizens, what they could be used, what you have to ask is, what is the value of the blind break? What does that do compared to actually choosing people? If you want, and I would say that it's actually, what it does is it actually limits the power to some extent. It takes away power from people who are trying to appoint people to where they want them to go. Yeah. So this could be used in any context. It doesn't have to be the citizens themselves. It can be groups of well-qualified citizens. So, for instance, let's think of one. There could be scientists, group of scientists who are in charge of looking at things, and maybe you choose them instead of just letting them choose each other, where you might get vested interests and corruption and so forth. You could have them chosen randomly, so that you broke that power of appointment. So I'm thinking, when you find places where the power of appointment can cause a problem, and that was the case in Mexico, and that's why they did it, you see.
So have you seen good results from these kind of experiments, or were there unexpected bad results from any of the examples that you've seen?
Well,
and why?
There have been bad examples in time of places of times when institutions were designed with or thought about with random selection. Only the worst example is the French Directory, which was the post-revolutionary sort of small government unit. And what they did on that was to say that they would deselect somebody randomly in order to start a rotation system going. And that had very bad consequences, because at a time when you wanted some sort of predictability and you wanted the people to be a reflection of the genuine voting pattern of the convention at that time, taking somebody away randomly was not very good at all. Whereas if what they could have done there was to have another member of the directory who was for shorter periods selected randomly from the convention as a way of kind of reporting back to the convention or something like that. That would have been a much more sensible way of using that. I think another example of that was in William Penn's early did an early draft for the Constitution of Pennsylvania and had a similar sort of idea that the people would vote for a Congress, and then a third of them would be selected randomly and taken out of office after 1 year, and then to start the rotation system. And he changed that. And made it so that you had 3 elections: election for people for 1 year, election for people for 2, election for other people for 3 years, and then could start the rotation system like that. So what I'm saying is that it shouldn't, when you use random selection, it shouldn't be in a way that compromises the collective voting. There's another example, it's the famous one that we see, is that when there's a tie in, I think in American elections, some American elections, when there's a tie, they toss a coin for it. But if 2 people have got 50% of the vote, exactly 50% of the vote each, it's totally unfair on the 50% that voted to do it on the toss of a coin. What would be better in those circumstances, for instance, would be for them to split office and have half a year each, if it was a year office, and toss a coin to see who had the first one and who had the second one.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, at all points in the process, like you could say it's random, but someone may get in there and distort the randomness a little bit. So
or just set it up, or just set it up so it doesn't actually work and doesn't actually help the institutions you're trying to put together. Yeah, it's always been used in answer to a problem, and the problem, the straightforward problem in the Athenians' case is that their council was like the head of was like the centre of the state. They were the people that set the agendas for the assemblies. They did all sorts of things. Those people looked after, oversaw the magistrates, did everything. Yeah. Now, when the democracy was first formed, they introduced that idea of using it randomly to prevent the aristocrats having a free hand if it had been elected. So it was a way of actually making sure of protecting that and making sure that it was representative of the demos of the people and not of the aristocrats. Yeah, so it was a defence of democracy, if you like, along with things like ostracism, which was put in at that stage. Yeah, in the Renaissance ones and the First and Second Florentine Republic and things like that, it was mainly used against factionalism, and it was used in combination with voting. So in Florence, they would elect a whole group of people whose names were put in a bag, and then would draw out a certain number to be the top executive for every 2-month period. And the reason that they did it like that was, if you didn't watch it, the families would be squabbling and using their power and influence and patronage to get one. It was so they had an idea of a shared political system amongst the chief families. That's why they did that, and that's the case in many other places that it's used.
Okay, yeah. Well, very good. How can people find out more about sortition and again, the work in Athens and your work? Where can they go? What's a good place for them to start learning?
Well, I have a book called The Political Potential of Sortition, which is quite it's my written up PhD thesis, which I did in Oxford in 2002 to 2007. Yeah, and that is, it takes the idea. It's a number of case studies, and it takes the theory that I talked about, the blind break and those sort of ideas. How do you identify a lottery and what it works, and what are the good points and the bad points of it? A lottery is unpredictable, and you have to have a good reason for it to be unpredictable, to make it worthwhile using. Yeah, and then a series of case studies, as I've explained to you, the historical case studies that show how it's happened and how it's been used at different times, both successfully and, as I explained, sort of unsuccessfully as well.
Okay, well, very good. Well, Oliver, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and
right.
I know these ideas, need a lot of fleshing out and everything, and being put into action. But at least you're thinking about it, so thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It's all it's important at the moment that we find ways of improving our forms of government so that people don't feel left out and then get tempted towards extremes and other from that. So, that's and important that people have trust in the political system as well. Yeah. And if we can think of ways of doing that, then that's going to be good for all of us. Okay.
Well, very good, Ollie. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Okay, appreciated doing that. Glad we could get through this time.
Organifi is a line of organic superfood blends that offer plant-based nutrition made with high-quality ingredients. Each Organifi blend is science-backed to craft the most effective doses with ingredients that are organic and free of fillers and contain less than 3 grams of sugar per serving, like Organifi green juice with essential superfoods and a clinical dose of ashwagandha. It helps reduce stress and support healthy cortisol levels. Or Organifi red juice, a superfood punch that increases energy without caffeine and only 2 grams of sugar. Each Organifi blend is easy to use simply by mixing it with water or your favorite beverage while on the go, and they don't compromise quality for taste. Organifi takes pride in offering the best tasting superfood products on the market at a price that works out to less than $3 a day. You can experience Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Go to Organifi.com/genius and use the code GENIUS for 20% off your order. That's Organifi.com/genius. Use code GENIUS to get 20% off any item. Remember, www.Organifi.com/genius.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at FindingGeniusPodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.